Welcome everybody to the 17th episode of Sports Cards Live. Very excited for tonight's show. Had a bit of a scheduling mix-up, or not a mix-up, but Steve Grad, who's the guy from Pawn Stars and the lead authenticator for Beckett Authenticating Services, had to reschedule. So he'll be on either this coming Wednesday or next Wednesday, the one after. We're gonna finalize that here in the next few days. So tonight we have two guests joining us, which you probably saw online. I'll get to them shortly, but first I want to thank the last two guests. Last Saturday we had Billy Celio, product manager from Upper Deck. Had a great discussion. That video is now living in the YouTube channel, so please go watch that if you haven't yet. It's another long one. They're all long, guys, so I do recommend that you consume these shows in chunks or portions, 15, 20, 30 minutes at a time, just so you don't get overwhelmed with these 2-hour episodes. But these discussions just tend to continue, and we have some great content. So I don't like to cut it off any earlier than we do. Also want to thank Justin for this past Wednesday. We had an amazing discussion about the state of the hobby and basketball cards and his history, the virtual world. So definitely go watch that one. It also is living on the YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed, please go subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate that. This next Wednesday is either going to be Steve Grad, the guy from Pawn Stars, or Ken Reed, who is the co-anchor of Sportsnet. Got to still talk to these guys and figure out who's going to go first, but we're going to get both of those guys on over the next few Wednesdays. And then next Saturday, June the 13th, is Jeff Wolf, the president of Iconic Auctions, which is the company that recently sold the love letter that Michael Jordan wrote to his girlfriend many years ago, before he was married, I believe. So that was a cool story. Jeff will be joining us, and we're going to talk about all things auctions and the state of the market, cards, memorabilia. He's got a ton of experience, a ton of cool items have passed through his hands. So we will bring him out on next Saturday. Finally, I just want to call a couple things to your attention. The Virtual Sports Card Expo, June 19th and 20th. I'll bring up the banner right now again for everybody. So sportcardexpo.com. They are releasing information sort of in bits right now, but there is more now than there has been so far. So please check that out. I will be participating. Look forward to seeing many of you there that weekend. And also the Center Ice Cardcast, which is a new podcast on all the platforms, including YouTube. They just released their episode 2, and they did a really nice review of the virtual expo with more information than I thought that they would even have access to. So check that out if you want more information on the virtual sports card expo. Check out Center Ice Cardcast on YouTube. Finally, before we move in, I just want to bring a certain auction that's going on right now to your attention. This is at Leland's. This is the Upper Deck The Cup Connor McDavid autographed rookie patch, graded a PSA Mint 9, and this is jersey numbered 97 of 99. So his jersey number. The auction's already at over almost $53,000, and really interested to see where that lands. That's over in about 13 days, so we'll visit that again. But if you're not aware of this, because it's not on eBay, it's at lelands.com, auction.lelands.com. Check that out, and interesting to see where this one lands. The Center Ice Cardcast guys, they predict over 100,000. I'm going to be a little bit more conservative, and I'm going to guess that this card will end at about 65 to 70,000 US dollars. Just what I'm guessing. Okay, let's bring out our two guests tonight. I'm just going to find my notes here. All right, guys. So I'm going to bring out Shawn Robb and Tim Heacock, and we're going to go to this view here. Actually, I like this one. This one is actually, I think we'll stick with this one, guys. We didn't do this earlier, but I like this view. Okay, so beside me, right there, we have Shawn Robb, guys. So Shawn Robb is, I'm going to read my notes here. He's a derivatives analyst. He's working in the banking industry, and he has some institutional investing experience as well. He's an MBA, 18 years professional experience, and 32 years collecting. Below him and I, we have Tim Heacock, also known as Chili Chow on Hobby Insider, on Instagram, and elsewhere, I'm sure. Tim's an investment advisor at RBC Dominion Securities. He's a certified financial planner. He's insurance licensed with a focus on estate planning, 25-year professional experience, 45 years in the hobby. So before we came on, we kind of figured out that between the three of us, we have about 119 years of collecting experience on the screen right now. That's a pretty big number. So we've been around between all three of us, and I think we all bring a few other things to the table, as I just described with these two fine gentlemen. So let's start with you, Shawn. First of all, thank you for joining me. Welcome to Sports Cards Live, episode number 17. It's great to have you. How are you doing tonight, my man?
Great, thank you.
Good, great to have you here. Tim, same thing to you. Thanks for joining. I know you're going to bring a wealth of good information. So, and how's the night for you so far on Saturday?
So far, so good. My wife's looking after the kids. Couldn't be better.
Okay, that's great. Okay, guys. So we'll start with you, Shawn. Why don't you just let us know a bit about your collecting history, how you started, what brings you to today, and then we'll do Tim, and then we'll get into the content.
Great. I was raised as an only child, just north of London, Ontario, and I had a lot of exposure to some of the OPG employees. They gave gifts of cards to my grandmother and my mother, who gave them to me and got me started in the 83-84 OPG set. I then over time built up the OPG sets and then got into Topps baseball, and I just started working my way backwards and trying to get into the vintage sets, get into the 70s, the 60s, and eventually the 50s.
Very cool. Okay, awesome. Tim, why don't you give us your history in the hobby and what sort of brought you to today, and then we'll hit the real juicy stuff.
Sure. Grew up a little bit earlier than Shawn did, so mid-70s, small town Ontario. Hockey was the sport everybody followed, watched, the Leafs. I used to get to go to games, collected cards. This is the first set that I collected.
The 75.
I have all my original cards. They're all in PSA 1s or 2s, I'm sure. And I brought something which is kind of interesting, just to show you how passionate I was about hockey cards. I wrote this when I was about 7 years old. It's my 3 wishes. I'm going to read them out. Tim Heacock, my 3 wishes. I would wish to have $3 million. I would wish to have all the hockey cards in the world. And I would wish I won all the trophies in hockey, like the Hart Trophy.
How are you doing with winning those trophies?
So I'm 0 for 3. And the closest on any of these is to getting all the hockey cards.
So you're not really close on any of them then, are you?
Not yet, but there's still time. 119 years collecting between us. It's got to go up still. My claim to fame, which I can't prove, is I created the first art card ever. I actually have it here. So I drew that in 1980. OPG never grabbed it and ran with it, so it's been hiding with me since then. But I've collected cards my whole life. I remember that after high school, went to university, walking through the mall in Toronto and seeing a Wayne Gretzky rookie card for sale in a shop for $100. And I went, holy cow, I've got 4 of those. And I went back, dug them all out, and it's just been nonstop collecting since. And I've watched the hobby evolve. I'll show you my greatest pull I've ever had to give you an idea of how the hobby's changed. It's this card. I pulled it fresh out of a pack, Upper Deck French Sergei Fedorov, which was the most exciting moment of my life because my dad and I cracked that at $20 a pack in 1990. That was a $350 card. I thought this was the greatest hobby ever. Now I actually searched eBay today, and the highest price is $5. But it's what it means to me. So now I collect patches. That's my main passion. I like older guys. So for instance, I love these one-timer cards. That's Dave Keon. I collect old autographs of players. I've got a wide variety of stuff. I'm getting my kids involved in it, which is great. My son's trying to get in it. It was interesting watching Shawn's episode a few ago. I just love what he's doing with his son and posting videos. And I think that's how you get Shawn Math. Yeah, that's how you get kids in the hobby, is by having someone else who's passionate about it saying, hey, do it with me. And they just ride along with it. So that's what got me to today.
Great. Okay, so I'm just going to let all the viewers kind of know how the 3 of us came about tonight. So first of all, when I realized that Steve Grad wasn't going to be able to join me on the show tonight, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And I mentioned last week or on Wednesday that I might just freestyle tonight on this when Saturday comes along. And Shawn actually sent me a message on Facebook and said, hey, if you're just going to be winging it, do you want me to send you a couple of questions that you can discuss on the show? I thought, and I wrote back, I said, I'll do you one better. Why don't you come on live and ask them live? And then that led to basically thinking about, well, maybe I'll bring on another guest. And Tim had sort of mentioned to me several weeks ago that, hey, I got a good idea for a topic that I think would be interesting. So I wrote to him late last night after he was already asleep, because he didn't respond to me until this morning. And I said, hey, can you come on the show tomorrow night? Because I got another guy, and I think you guys will. I think it'll be a good mix. So they both, we met earlier today. We've had a few discussions to sort of set the stage for tonight. And that's how we came together. Shawn, I don't really know Shawn, except that I know we have met at shows. I think you bought something off me at a summit one time, probably at an expo too. Tim, on the other hand, I do go back with. We've known each other from Hobby Insider and online, and then dealing at the expo several times, and really online communication. So I'm pretty happy with having both you guys here. I think we're gonna have a good show. So let's get into it. We talked about, or I've talked about, that this show is going to be about investing and estate planning for collectors. Tim is a professional investor, an estate planner. Shawn, the same, maybe not estate planning, but has investment experience and really just financial experience. So I want to bring these guys on and have a talk and give you guys some advice if we can, but nothing that will be legally binding. Nothing that we tell you today is investment advice. You cannot come back at us if you go buy something and lose any money, okay? Before we do that, we have some comments. Let's get them through here quickly. Ziggy is in the house watching. Thank you, Ziggy. Welcome to the show. As Justin, your guest, said the next day, Justin called it on Wednesday, saying that Vegas Dave would be hyping Dave Carr cards, which he did the exact next day. Andy, welcome to the show. Billy, 20% buyer premium. I still don't understand why they chose an auction house. Jason, hello, everyone. Thanks, guys. Hello, Jason. London represent. Awesome. Tim, is that nice shirt from The Natural? There you go. It sure is. We were talking. I'm
impressed.
There you go. Andy knows it. Okay, Shawn, we're going to start with you tonight. One of the things that we had talked about, which I think I want to jump right into this topic because I found it really interesting. I think a lot of people watching will have thought some of these same thoughts. And it really has to do with the fact that the basketball hobby has taken off lately. Cards have taken off. And if you were to have invested, say, $10,000 10 years ago in basketball cards versus $10,000 10 years ago in, say, hockey, baseball, or football cards, you might be a lot better off. And I think that feeds into the whole FOMO, the fear of missing out. Shawn, you had some ideas about that. Can you speak to that at all? Kind of get us kicked off here.
Yes, when COVID was considered a pandemic, I looked at my stock portfolio, and I was stuck in it like everyone else. You couldn't trade out of things like cruise lines fast enough to keep an average price. You were already down by the time you knew. And you were very locked in, and I think that how the basketball market for cards has exploded has been similar in that it locked a lot of people in an upward trajectory, whether they wanted it or not. It's a market, and it doesn't ask you how you feel. Those people who had a lot of Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman cards, all of a sudden were looking at prices that were going from 2 to 5 to 10 to 20, and you couldn't trade in and out fast enough for the most part. You could augment your collection. You could buy more, especially with Dennis Rodman. He moved up a little later than the other two. You could keep buying Dennis Rodman, but you really couldn't transform yourself from a hockey card collector to a basketball collector just because they got hot. So basically it rewarded those people who were already in.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, hearing a little bit of echo, we'll ignore that. So, you know, I'll admit when basketball cards started really charging up in values, really at the end of March, early April, right through April, continuing through May, I had those thoughts of, man, you know, it's not the fear of missing out, it's the fear that I missed out. A little bit different, you know, and hindsight's 2020, of course, but you know, for anybody, and luckily I did pick up some basketball cards just over a year ago, or a year to 2 years ago, and experienced some increase in value, but not as much as I would have if I took all the dollars I ever put into hockey, baseball, football, and had put it all into basketball. I think a lot of people are kind of thinking, man, I sure wish I went about this differently back then. Similar to the Topps Project 2020, which is just out. We weren't even planning to talk about, but it just jumped in my mind that, you know, you could have bought those for $20 right from Topps. A few weeks later, or a couple months later, some of these cards are doing 3,000. They've come back down to earth, or somewhat down to earth, and have really come back to correct it, I would say. Tim, do you have any sort of comments on fear, the fear of missing out kind of issue that we all have, and how it applies to either to the hobby and investing in non-hobby assets as well?
It's funny. I feel it all the time. So I look at my collection and I see things that out in the hobby that are rising exponentially. Just in the hockey card market, look at Wayne Gretzky rookie cards, so graded cards. All vintage graded cards are just going through the roof. I don't have a single one. And I'm thinking, oh, why didn't I get into that side of the hobby? And I step back and I just think to myself, well, what is my purpose with my collection? Am I trying to get this type of cards? Am I trying to chase from the investing side? Or am I just buying what I like and keeping it? And there's always a mix of both. And Jeremy, we've talked about this, but you know, if you're trying to get in there and make a buck on this business, and lots of folks are, you know, it's you got to find the trends before they happen. And it takes foresight, it takes luck. I don't think anyone's got I know in the stock market, there's no formula to get that right. So, you know, that's kind of how I see it. I haven't lucked out at all.
Yeah, I mean, one of my thoughts on it is that one thing we can do to set ourselves up for success is really studying the players, studying the teams they're on. And even if you can do this, if you can somehow tune into local radio stations in the cities of these players, and what are the local sports commentators saying about these players? How popular are they in their own cities? You know, what sort of expectations does team management have for these players? Are they an A-list prospect, a B-list? You know, that is intel that not everybody, I think, goes the distance to get. I've seen a couple guys online talk about researching the players, and they all they want to do is look at statistics. And I think statistics are very important, but I think it's more important to get an understanding, like the teams do at the draft combines, getting to know the individuals, their character. And that's something that we don't necessarily know as sports card collectors. So that's, I think, something that you can really do to help yourself with that. Okay, cool. So let's get into something that's really interesting. And it's interesting to both. So all three of us on screen, we're all up in Canada. A lot of our viewers are in Canada. We have a lot of viewers in the States as well. And so this topic, we're kind of calling it, you know, the added burden for Canadians that we have in the hobby up here. And it's interesting because, first of all, for the Canadian viewers, just to make sure you understand what these burdens are that we're all under and that you're all aware of them. And for the American viewers and international viewers to know that, you know, as a lot of you have customers up in Canada that you're shipping cards to, if you're selling on eBay or elsewhere, that we in Canada do have these additional burdens that are upon us. So Shawn, I'm going to start with you. I want you to talk about the cross-border issue, and then we'll move to Tim, and we'll get into some of the other items on the list. So Shawn, can you touch, please, on cross-border issues for collectors?
Okay, I think the one that starts off right away, and I'll give as an example, there's a company out there that helps people sell called Sport Lots. When you look at how much does it cost you to ship to Canada, the amounts are so distinct between any United States address and any Canadian address, that right away you're already looking at a $4 or $5 differential. And then if that person sends that item using either United States Postal Service or UPS, and they assign a value to it, if it crosses a certain threshold, then not only will we be necessarily charged a HST, but if depending on the courier, we are likely to get a fee for handling of that HST charge. United States Postal Service is the best of the couriers, and I've personally paid a tremendous amount for something that came via Purelator. So I guess it starts right there, and it's a huge difference. And United States Postal Service is very cheap to ship all the way from California to New York, compared to what we're facing in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, we see it certainly with the global shipping charges on eBay that Canadians, we really hate that because it's extremely expensive. If you buy a $10 card, it could cost you $25 to $35 to have it shipped. That's a huge part. That's a huge part of one of the burdens for Canadians. Tim, what would you add on to that in terms of the additional burden for Canadians in the hobby?
So, Shawn, great point, and because that is a huge deterrent for my own collection, just buying on eBay, because it's that global shipping program that they've implemented, plus 13, 15, 18, 25 bucks to ship a card, has reduced my transactions by 50% on eBay itself. And then there's sellers who won't even ship to Canada, which is frustrating. So I collect baseball cards as well, and it is extremely difficult to collect baseball cards being a Canadian. It's cost inefficient. It's hard to actually get the cards. Then you've got mysterious charges crossing the border. You don't know when you're going to get dinged. So what's going to be hit by extra charges from the government? Those are the main things that are causing me issues right now as far as trying to build my own collection. We'll get into estate planning, I think, shortly, and maybe I'll elaborate a bit more on just what it's like to have assets in the U.S. at ComC or even with EPACs with Upper Deck. Jeremy, I'll let you lead into that when you want to.
Sure. I think, okay, let's touch on that one a little bit later when we get into the estate planning piece. Okay, Shawn, one of the topics that you and I discussed earlier was the concept, and this is now more into investing, what you're investing in, the concept of pivoting and diversification. What are your thoughts on like when a collector needs to consider pivoting, diversifying, and what are the advantages of these for a collector?
Okay, wonderful. Well, we've never seen a month that moved in terms of sports cards, I think, like March of 2020, in my opinion. Maybe going back to 1991 would probably be the last time when we had Conseco rookies, jumping all over the place. So what happened in March 2020 was that Michael Jordan was the leader of the price movers, and he carried with him Scottie Pippen very soon after. And I mean, we had Michael Jordan and a chart of Michael Jordan cards, all show peaks, February, but more so March. Now, how you can pivot, and I think it's really important that anyone out there has the belief that they can pivot. I haven't seen anyone who can't. Just because you missed the boat on Michael Jordan doesn't mean that you didn't get the shot to pick up Scottie Pippen next. And if you still missed that, there was quite a time before Dennis Rodman started picking up. And then an odd thing happened where in a lot of sets, Dennis Rodman cards surpassed the value of Scottie Pippen. And so if you look at the statistics and who won awards in those years, you'll be led to players like Akeem Olajuwon and Charles Barkley, Shaquille O'Neal. They didn't move right as soon as The Last Dance, and they sat at the same prices in many cases. You have those opportunities to pivot if you have belief for the future, that you believe that Shaquille O'Neal will rise in price. So you have to have a belief and then act on it. And if you act on it with conviction and you buy, either good cards or lots of copies of something you believe in, you still have the chance to pivot.
Yeah. So I love that, because really what you're saying is, I don't think it, I think the general feeling amongst collectors, and especially collectors who collect with an eye to investing as well, is that we always feel like, we missed it and there's no more opportunities. But I think there's always opportunities. And if you look hard enough, I think what you're saying, Shawn, is that if you look hard enough, you're gonna be able to spot some of these opportunities. You just have to maybe open your mind a little bit, think outside the box a little bit, and anticipate what could come down the pipe in the future. I mean, right now we know that sports are all about to, some sports are about to start up again. Is there opportunity to buy or opportunity to sell? I think if we are looking for these opportunities and you actually take your time and think logically, you might be able to find some. You saw Michael Jordan going up in value. Hey, maybe Scottie Pippen goes up in value. Well, maybe Dennis Rodman is going to go up in value. You need to be nimble. Pivoting is a great word. And actually, Andy asked the question, pivot means to change your stance and either buy or sell. I think it can mean that, Andy, but I think it could also mean pivoting from, say, if you're currently on a program where you're putting 90% in, or let's say 75% into hockey and 25% into basketball, or 25% into other sports, maybe you're going to pivot and do 40% hockey, 60% basketball, or whatever it means to just kind of adjust your approach, I think is kind of what we mean right now by pivoting. And when you think of diversification, I think everybody knows, and Tim can probably speak to this, that diversification is important in any asset holding, or across your assets, just to protect you from one class of assets really tanking, going down in value and hurting your overall net worth or wealth. So good stuff there. We're going to back up here. Chris says the global shipping program is used by a bunch of sellers due to scammers abusing the system on eBay. Fair comment. I can understand why they would do that. Al says, I saw a new SPA Aginla auto card on eBay today, listed for $40, and the shipping was $30 on top of it. Yeah, that's going to be a detractor for sellers for buyers in Canada to purchase from sellers in the States. And one of the messages I like to get across to American sellers tonight is, if you can avoid it, please don't use it, especially if you trust your customers, which I think a lot of people don't. But for the most part, if you think about the common sort of generalization about Canadians, is that we're all very nice. We're always saying thank you and sorry. So maybe start trusting us a little bit more and try to find ways around the global shipping program if you can. Barry says, listening to you guys makes me realize again how fortunate we are to have so many advantages living in America, except for free healthcare and your president. Can't imagine the frustrations. I'll throw those two comments in for myself. Yeah, I mean, in the sports card world, Americans have a humongous advantage over Canadians. I will definitely agree with that particular comment. It sure would be nice if we could get past the import charges and the shipping delays, being caught up in customs. It's also important for Canadians to be patient when receiving something from Americans, because they can be caught up in customs for a long time, or just at the border and not crossing. So it's important that we as buyers don't just throw negative feedbacks or make claims right away. Let's talk to the sellers in the States. Let's try and work with them and strengthen the relationship between American eBay and other platform sellers and Canadian buyers. I would really want to encourage that. Billy says more awareness on how to game the postal system, how to game it would be nice. Cost me $3 to send to Canada from Nashville on eBay. It isn't even an option to sell like that as a US seller. Yeah, I mean, I can't help you with that, but I sure would love you to be able to figure that out, especially by contacting eBay and finding out what you can do as an American seller to help us up here. I know we'd greatly appreciate that, Billy. Barry says things are already dipping. Start buying the stuff that was hot a week ago or a week or two ago, as the current guys start to get more love again. The level playing field we discussed, Jay, is now gone. Yeah, I mean, a lot of things have come down in value since they were super hot. But you know what? I mean, if you're looking at cards like, the key guys, they're not coming down that much. I'm still watching these pretty closely. Like the Michael Jordans, Wayne Gretzky's are going up right now. They are not going down. Michael Jordan's, if you look at the PSA 10, it did 108,000, then it did 90. Now they've done in the 70s. I mean, that's a whole other ball game, if you ask me. I'm not gauging the whole hobby based on PSA 10 Michael Jordan rookies right now, but I think that there are still opportunities. And when things come down, hey, it's a better time to buy probably. Hat tricks and home runs. The other angle is to not be so emotionally tied into the market. You sometimes have to cut a loss to get gain. I mean, guys, I'm sorry that I'm doing all the talking right now, but I have to address that comment because I've said that exactly that before on the show, that if you are married to your cards that have gone down in value, all you're doing is sitting on dead inventory or dead personal collection items, unless you don't care about value, and then keep it as long as you want. But if you're in this to flip or to make some money or to fund the hobby, if you're sitting on something that's gone down in value, it pays to take the loss, bring in the cash, and convert that cash into something else that you can then go make money on and recoup the loss, instead of sitting on a consistently declining value asset like that. Like that's Fedorov, Tim. Exactly. So hat tricks and home runs. Thank you for the comment. I love that. Once it makes it to global selling, eBay sees it as delivered by the seller. Okay, fair enough. It's a toggleable item for eBay as sellers. When it was new, it was on auto by default. Okay. Les says, Tim, you've convinced me to diversify. Sell me that that in the game Bobby Orr jumbo patch. Yeah, Tim does have some amazing jumbo patches for sure. And Ralphie says, when seeing items priced in US dollars, it makes Canadians sad. Yeah, I mean, it does, but I think we're all at the point now where we can easily do that conversion and understand what it is we're spending. When I'm buying on eBay, I don't really care what the currency is. I just want the darn card. So, okay, enough of me talking. Thank you everybody for the comments. Let's get back to the guests now. Thank you, Ralph, for that last one. And hat tricks and home runs, I do thank you again for your comment. I really enjoyed that one, and nice to see you on the show tonight. Okay, let's move along, guys. Shawn, you talked about insurance with me, and just the importance of insurance on your collection. Can you touch on that? Remind me what you were saying before, and then Tim, I want you to jump in and get into estate planning.
Okay, well, almost everyone who owns a condominium or a house is likely to have at least the typical package of homeowners insurance. In a typical package, there's usually $50,000 assigned to a group of assets that includes all types of collectibles and art, and sometimes some other items. So a $50,000 cap on that group. So you think about what could really happen to your house. A lot of condominiums are made of concrete, and so they're not likely to ever burn down. Some people's house have a lot of lumber in them. It's possible that the house could burn down entirely. What's probably a little more likely is a sprinkler hitting your cards and doing tremendous damage. And so it's pretty easy to go over $50,000. If you're collecting, a lot of Bobby Orr cards, or if you're collecting complete sets from the 70s and 60s, that might be multi-thousand per set.
It's easy to get 50 grand.
So I think most collectors are probably underinsured. One thing that I guess the 50,000 cap does do is that it does give you a bit of protection against some smash and grab crimes, or a situation where you got flooded, but only maybe an inch or two of water getting at some of your sets. So in many cases, maybe 50,000 is all right. It's really difficult to go beyond that, because I've reached out to my insurer, who's a major insurer, and they're not at all interested in adding a rider specific to the collectibles category. You can try and work with them, but honestly, what you'll find is that you may end up spending more on your collectibles category than you do on your entire condominium or house insurance. And if you do that, then you're now going to lose money on your collection, and you're not going to have a lot of fun.
Right, because you're paying premiums all the way through, and that's just really digging at any gains you might have upon your eventual disposition of the cards. And I want to just say to the viewers, you know, this is a very investment sort of themed discussion right now. But be clear, we are collectors here, and I know a lot of you are collectors. But when you are a collector and you have significant, or even whatever significant is to you, money, capital, value tied up in your cards, and maybe you only invested $10, now they're worth $1,000 because your cards went up in value, you become an investor by default. Like it or not, you are invested in your collectibles. Shawn, do you have a solution at all to this?
Well, it's a little easy. It's a little easier in the United States, where there are a few corporations who have been doing at least closer to reasonable priced insurance for collectibles. If you Google, sports card insurance, you'll typically get some American companies that are offering that. I did find one in Canada, and they required a full analysis and like everything had to be documented, and the values needed to be assessed before they would engage in insurance. And I'll also just say one other thing is that you got to also have look at what perils you're insured against, because a lot of times if you live near a river and that river floods, that's overland water, and so you may have a lot of insurance on your house, and there could be conflicting clauses.
Sure.
So you also have to think about that too.
Yeah, for sure. You know, being at the National in the States, there are companies set up at the National that are specifically there to sell sports card and collectible insurance policies. And I believe I've even seen one set up here, either at the Expo or the Summit in Edmonton. Tim, you are insurance licensed. What can you add to what Shawn was saying to maybe give the viewers some more advice on insurance, or just set them straight? Corroborate what Shawn said on what is the landscape really like in terms of insuring collectibles right now from your perspective?
Okay, so specifically I'm life insurance licensed. That's a separate show, but okay. I have been insurance licensed for house and auto insurance way back in my early career. And Shawn's brought up an interesting point, and that ties into risk management for collectibles. And he highlighted some of my concerns. So we talked earlier, Jeremy, about things that keep me up at night. A fire in my house, theft, my kids tearing my cards apart by accident, because I've got a 9-year-old that loves to shoot them against the wall. Those are things that I worry about, because these are valuable collectibles that you keep on hand. You compare it to the stock market, you don't keep your stocks on hand. Those are in a trust portfolio, they're looked after, they're insured, you're okay for the value. But when it comes to this kind of stuff, any type of collection, you're managing the risk yourself. So when you look at saying, well, what kind of repercussions do I have if something happens? You default to home insurance or condo insurance, and you look into the text of those policies. And Shawn's dead on. There are limits on collectibles, and each company is different. So you have to actually look into your own policy and say, okay, well, what have I got? And it could be as little as $2,500 to $5,000, depending on the company you're using. And then you look at, well, how they determine the value. Oh, they need an appraisal. How do you get an appraisal on a sports card? It's impossible. So there's not much there. So you have to keep that in the back of your mind that, okay, and Shawn also mentioned, you can't get a policy in Canada to cover as a rider. It just doesn't exist. I've searched for this myself. In the US, they've got specialty companies that deal with sports cards and collector cars and just about anything you can think of. It doesn't apply up here. So we're kind of stuck holding the bag a little bit. And it's a risk management that everybody's got to look at and say, well, what am I going to do to protect my cards? Like, do I buy a safe? Do I keep them in a safety deposit box? What am I comfortable keeping in my house, and where am I going to keep it? So if you think, well, the first thing that thieves look for is what's beside your bed. The first drawer, what's, not that I'm giving away where I keep my cards, but they go through the drawers, they look under beds, like everything that's there where a lot of folks would keep stuff, that's where they go first. So it takes some thought. If it's a worry and a concern, thinking I've got a lot on hand, you gotta start looking after this yourself, because you can't look to insurance anymore for this.
Agreed. I mean, yeah. I carried a rider on my policy for a little while, and I had to send them a detailed list of every single card that I had, and I had to assess value. And I did that by I assessed the value myself, actually, and I based it on what I wanted it to be worth, without being totally irrational about it. But the sum of that valuation was helped to determine what I had to pay in premiums. So the higher you value your collection, the higher premiums I had to pay. And Tim, that was years ago. I changed my approach, and I have a different security strategy now, if you will. So I think the message here in terms of insurance, everybody, is that, be proactive in how you're storing your cards. First of all, where are they? Are they 3 feet above the ground so that they're not going to get flooded? Where do you live relative to bodies of water? Are you in? What is your home? What is your house or your condo built of? Is it concrete? Is it wood? Find out. If it's wood, you're in trouble if there's a fire in that building. If it's not, you may be a little bit less risk in terms of your collection being destroyed. And then wherever you are, if you're in the States, you can access some policies. They're not cheap. And if you're in Canada, it's more challenging. But I think if you want, you can work with your insurance companies if you are willing to pay the price. There have been some comments on this stuff. So let's get to these right away here. So Billy says, how would a claims adjuster determine the value of a one-of-a-kind item like a rare high-value 101? Well, I mean, I'll take this. I think it depends. If you have proof of purchase, that's one way that you'd basically have evidence of what you paid for it. If you pulled it out of a pack and you don't have that, then you're going to look for comparables. You're going to look for other one-of-ones of that player with the same attributes on the card, and convince the adjuster that that's what it's worth. Andy very astutely observes that I take tiny sips of my water glass again. Thank you, Andy. That's why I smiled about 5 minutes ago when I saw you type that. Richard says, does the insurance game change if you bought your collectibles with an investment Inc., i.e. your cards are owned by a corporation? There's an excellent question. I don't know. I think it depends on what insurance companies are, what sort of insurance they are willing to extend to corporations. But I think it would probably, I can speak to in Canada. I don't know if you guys can. Maybe one of you can take this, but my feeling is that it's going to be the exact same sort of insurance that's available. Which one of you guys can speak to this? If either of you, please do.
So when you're purchasing an asset with a corporation, you have to see if it's passive or an active asset. So is this part of the business of the corporation, or is this a side asset? It would be a type of policy. Again, you're looking at the same type of stuff as far as appraisals. Is this a corporate liability policy with assets beside it? So you can investigate, but I haven't heard of anything either on a corporate side or on a business liability side that would carry into sports cards or collectible assets. Usually those are personally owned items, unless it's an actual business.
Okay, let's get to Richard's next question. I understand Beckett values may be used on valuations on capital gains for alternative investments such as sports cards. Would that apply in the case of insurance? I mean, I think you want to go with what's going to benefit you the most. If Beckett values are higher than what's actually going on in the marketplace, you might get away with it. If the marketplace is going to be better for you in terms of values than Beckett, you might want to go with marketplace. You might want to show them completed listings. You might want to show them what you paid for your cards if that's more than they're worth now. I think there's different approaches for that, but I'm just speaking really off the cuff. Tim, is that something that you can speak to just to provide some more?
I'm a bit off the cuff too, because again, this was a couple lives ago, but when it gets to the claims process, that's where the rubber hits the road. Like, what are they actually going to give you for your loss? And this is where the insurance company wants you to prove the value, and this is why they want appraisal. So it's like when you insure jewelry, they want the appraisal. What's this thing worth? And then they want to give you actual cash value, saying, okay, well, if you bought it today and it's $5,000 more than you paid for, well, you get the $5,000 on top of it. That's how actual cash value works. But as far as a sports card goes, you have to, it's less of a reliable market. And I'm trying to think as an adjuster, if they came into this and say, well, I don't know if I trust where you're getting your data from. An eBay sale or a guide, we're just going to give you what's on the insurance policy if you actually have it insured. That's getting deep into how a claim would work, and you want to talk to an adjuster and specifically what the process would be.
Okay, fair. I am aware actually of so PWCC, the notorious eBay consignment seller. They have a service called the Vault where you can actually store your prized collectibles in their vault. And I believe if you look at the detail or the fine print sort of thing on their website, you'll see that they actually insure the cards that you have with them at current market value. And that's always changing. And they're probably one of the best out there to assess what that is, because of the volume of cards that they broker, and they know what cards are worth really probably better than most people do. So that's another option, is to store your cards at PWCC and have your insurance with them. Although you really have to trust them if you're going to do that. And I know a lot of people don't trust anybody with their collection. So I think that's something just at least to be aware of, everybody. Ralph says, do banks insure items stored in a safety deposit box, or would that have to be separate? That's a good question. Is it insured if it's in the bank, but the bank wouldn't know what's in there? So anyone know the answer to that? Either of you guys? No, we don't know.
I'll
Okay,
take a
Ralph.
stab at it. So there is a little bit of insurance that comes with it, but it's not on a specific item. And again, I'd have to figure out the dollar amount. I'll give you an example. So it might be $5,000 if your stuff is missing, and they don't care if it's jewelry or a card or whatever. So I know the bank has something in place. I've also heard that they haven't paid out on it. So okay, in certain cases, so I don't know how reliable that is, but you think a safety deposit box is theoretically the safest place to put stuff. There should be some backing somewhere.
Right. Yeah. Shawn, do you have any knowledge about that at all, or not?
Yes. One of the things that is possible with insurance under some circumstances is that the card, if it goes missing, actually didn't have to be in your home at the time it was missing. You actually could have been taking it with you to the expo, and it could have been stolen from your luggage. It is possible under the right circumstances that your homeowner's insurance may actually pay out. Although I will warn people, one of the things that I see as a requirement is that a police report in many cases has to be engaged within 24 hours of the crime being noticed. So that's something that we want to keep in mind, that if something goes missing, you don't want to wait before you report it to the police.
Really, really important information right there, guys. If something happens, you got to call the police pretty much right away then to lock in that time limit and not have yourself excluded because you weren't even aware that was a requirement. So very, very valuable information right there. Billy says, in the States, I have to carry insurance on my safety deposit box. It's worth it in the rare event a bank vault floods or fire starts. It's about $10 a month. So there you go. And Andy says, it's a bit harder to enjoy your collection if it's at someone else's house, i.e. the vault at PWCC. Yeah, I mean, I can certainly agree with that. Okay, we have these cards. We love them. We want them with us, I think, a lot of the time, so we can enjoy them and look at them. And I mean, that's why we like cards that we like. We like to look at them. So who doesn't want to be able to do that, right? Although you can scan them and keep pictures of them on your phone or your computer, that's also easy to do. Okay, let's move along, guys. So Tim, we talked about a broad category of issues that keep you up at night in the hobby. And I think these are going to really resonate with pretty much everybody watching. So I'm going to run through the list, and then we will sort of, Tim, you'll kick us off, and Shawn, you'll jump in here and there with all these issues. So actually, Tim, Yeah, I will. I'll list them off. So one of them, Tim, is fake patches and fake autographs. Another one is trimming. Another one is authenticity. Another one is market manipulation and insider trading. Another one are buyers groups. And finally, eBay versus Facebook and Instagram as transactional platforms. So kick us off, Tim. Whichever one keeps you up at night the most, which one would that be? And describe what you're thinking.
Okay, so I'm glad we have about 4.5 hours left in the show, because I'll need that for this topic. I'll be specific to myself. So because I collect patches, and big patches and expensive patches, patch faking, and more in a broader sense, fraud within our hobby is worrisome to me in a huge manner. So to the point where when I'm looking at a card, I've passed on cards with fantastic patches because I don't trust it. I think I don't know if that can actually be real, and to be at that point in the hobby where I can't trust something I'm looking at concerns me. So certain companies have protocols. I know it's come up in previous shows as, why don't you do this to stop patch faking, or put a picture on the back of the card. Have a database with it. So you're kind of taking a leap of faith and having trust with the company itself. If it's if you're breaking a box, but also the seller, you're buying the seller is saying, is this patch exactly as it was when you got it, or has anything happened to it? So autographs. So autograph faking. I gave you an example earlier, Jeremy. I'm going to share one of my favorite baseball sets. Came out in 2004. It's called Topps Originals. It's a buyback set, and they came back with phenomenal star baseball cards autographed by the players, numbered from 101s up to out of 55s. And they came in encapsulated by Topps with 2 stickers on each end. And these are great. I spent a lot of money on these cards, and I have them in my inventory. And then what I've noticed in the last 15 years is that people have been able to lift the stickers off the top, take the common cards out, and create their own star autograph, a Hank Aaron autograph on a card, and put it in the holder, put the seal back on. And it's gotten to the point where the fake or the fraudulent autographs are more prevalent than the real ones. And there's cards on eBay, many of them, they aren't even on the checklist. And I see people bidding on these things going, holy cow, like, you don't even know what you're buying. Like, not only have you not done the research, you're just trusting it. And the autographs are pretty good. They're not far off, but that's a set that's just been obliterated. And it makes me sad, but also makes me think there's a lot of fraud in this hobby. There's a lot of folks out there trying to make a buck off of us. And we've talked about Kenny fakes. We've talked about, look at PSA. We're not going to get into that too much. But when you've got a trusted source that is implicated into a broad scenario where they're fraudulent in some manner, and you think, holy cow, well, that's what we know. That's actually where they were part of it. What about the stuff that we don't know, or that they weren't part of it? Like, how many cards have been trimmed that they had no idea was trimmed? It's out there, so it's not authentic anymore. So these are things that I'm worried about with my collection. I'm worried about the hobby because it's a really, we were comparing it to the stock market, and the stock market's got regulations, it's got oversights, it's got repercussions if you break the rules. We're kind of the Wild West in our hobby, where there is no repercussions. There is no watchdog out there keeping an eye out for us. There's no insider tradings. There's no people watching for buyer manipulations, buyer groups, as you mentioned. We're on our own. So how do we mitigate risk for this stuff? And you can only do it to a certain extent. And Stephen Perot said it on his broadcast, that it's research. You research the heck out of stuff. What should this thing look like? What do cards from this set typically look like? And does this fit? Is this the right jersey? Is this the right patch to match the other patches that came out there? Is it other sets that you see this company using a jersey like this in other places? So you can get some sense of that. One thing I do like is autograph certification. So a lot of cards, that's what I'll buy now. Just got some great ones from Jeremy. So buying a raw autograph on something, you're taking a risk. And someone told me that 90% of Mickey Mantle autographs on eBay are fakes. And they're getting better with fakes. They're getting to the point where they can, well, actually, I was thinking about this today. You can almost 3D print a Wayne Gretzky rookie card and put it on original stock. Like, when you can make an $80,000 card, I'm going to spend some time and money and figure out how to make it fraudulent. And we don't know what can be out there. So that's stuff that keeps me up at night.
Yeah, the fake patch one is a big one for me. It came up last on Wednesday on the show. But I want to add, actually Todd Poland, who was my guest on episode number 4, he mentioned, and he's a friend of mine, so I can actually say, he mentioned the show that he spent about $2.5 million on cards in the last 15 or 20 years, whatever it was. And a lot of that was into the cup, autograph, like RPAs of Upper Deck's The Cup, which is, for any basketball guys out there, it's the equivalent of Exquisite, if you didn't know that. And he's basically, and he was driving the values of these cards in the hobby. One guy had at least a very big part of driving the values of the cards in the hobby for probably at least 10 years. And he's basically stopped. He's basically stopped buying the cup because he's too afraid of fake patches. And I think that's number one, the number one problem are fake patches, and the number 2 problem is that a guy like Todd is no longer in the hobby, and that will have a detrimental effect on the value to the cards that everybody else has, because he's not there helping to prop it up. So something really to consider. And I hope that the companies, the manufacturers, do start to find ways to help protect the value of their cards into the future, and not just worry about it until they're sold through the distribution networks, but actually consider what goes on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years out, and protect the customers long term. I really want to see that happen. I think that's very important. Okay, so that's patch and auto fakes. Shawn, anything on that from yourself?
I think Tim covered that very well. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so let's move on. And Tim, you covered a bunch of stuff there. Really, I think trimming sort of falls into the same sort of category. It's a problem. Everybody knows it. There was a scandal last year. A lot of big names in the hobby were implicated, and hopefully, that problem goes away a little bit. And the reason why I even say that is because, Tim, you mentioned that we are the Wild West here, and we are not regulated by a central governing body that has any authority. However, we do self-regulate quite a bit. And there are all sorts of detectives out there that are looking for fake patches. People who are experts on a certain team or a certain era or a certain player, they are out there, and they're out usually on the various hobby message boards or the Facebook groups. They're out there alerting other people to these issues. So while there's no real authoritative regulator, we are self-regulating, and I think it's important that we continue to do that as a hobby until, or forever, but until perhaps there is some greater power out there that wants to come in and help us all out to preserve the value of these things. Because again, this is an investment-themed show, but professional investment-themed show, not just, buy Mike Trouts and flip them 2 weeks later for a 15 or 20 or 100% return. We're talking about protecting the value of your wealth if you have wealth tied up in sports cards. So I think that's a fair tie-in, right, guys? That it's important that we and the hobby protect everything that we have invested. Otherwise, we're all going to come out of this looking like idiots, for lack of a better term, if it gets worse and worse and worse and never gets better. Let's talk about buyers groups for a moment, because there's been some questions about it. So I'm going to just go back to some of these comments here. So Andy actually says, is a buyers group where a number of people pool their money together to purchase something more expensive? Well, that's not how I think of it, Andy. The way I think of a buyers group is that it can be one guy, but it can be 10 guys, and they're kind of in cahoots in that they're saying, okay, guys, let's go buy up all the Shaquille O'Neal 1992 Upper Deck rookies and PSA 9s and 10s. Let's buy up every single one of them that hits the market and drive up the price. And I'm not saying you're bidding against each other. You're just going to buy them all as cheap as you can, but you're going to buy them all and create that demand. And then you're probably going to tell other people that you should probably be buying Shaquille O'Neal cards. And then you're going to list them for sale at a price that's super high. And then maybe someone is going to come and buy one, so that you actually have a comp that can be referenced on eBay and say, hey, look, the last one just sold for $1,500 when you were buying them for $250 or $300 or whatever that discrepancy is. And all of a sudden, you've inflated the value of these cards artificially, because once you're done buying them and once everyone else is done buying them that wants one, well, now what? Are you going to keep on buying them forever into eternity, or are they going to come back down in value once you've sold out of yours? If you're the buying group. So I think the term buyers group, Andy, it just refers to one or more people who are sort of in cahoots trying to manipulate the price of a certain card or cards. Barry says backdoor stuff from company employees to their friends to sell for them and split profits is similar to insider trading. Yeah, that would for sure be similar, 100%. Billy, like Jeremy mentioned on the last show, Upper Deck could very easily take pictures of all the cup RPAs. He did it himself in less than a week. 4 days, I took pictures of 28,000 cup cards. That is correct. Les, welcome to the show, my man. Seems like such an easy fix for Upper Deck or in the game to just take photos of their patch cards and keep a large database. Why don't they do it? Well, we did talk about this with I think it was with Billy from Upper Deck, and it's basically an added cost. I believe it's basically an added cost that would drive up the price of packs. And the other problem that they have with it is that it's more humans touching the cards. I touched every single patch card in 0809 the Cup. If you have an 0809 Cup card in your collection, I touched it. But trust me, I was very careful because I respect these cards, and I knew that I'd end up having some myself. Barry says, hopefully that stuff isn't happening like it used to. Definitely, hopefully it isn't. Richard, the amount of autograph forgeries is really scary. Hence, I prefer to obtain autographs in person. But of course, this is many times not possible, especially if we're talking about deceased players or players who live far away from you, for sure. Paul, welcome to the show. Sadly, the criminal element likes to evolve to new ways of profiting off their marks. Yeah, they're, criminal minds, they're always one step ahead of us. And it's important that we keep ourselves, I believe, up to date and just always be critical, as having audit experience, financial statement audit experience, we're trained to go into every situation with professional skepticism. It doesn't mean that you don't trust people. You're professionally skeptical of things. I think we should all be professionally skeptical of certain cards that we may be purchasing if you don't know where they were, the chain of ownership along the way until they got to you. Okay, great. So the eBay versus Facebook and Instagram discussion, Tim, that you brought up, can you speak to that, please?
Absolutely. So I've used eBay since 1999. So I was sort of an early adopter to that. The only thing I've been an early adopter for. And I've done a lot of transactions. I've seen that.
Guys, Tim still has a flip phone.
A what? What's a flip phone?
Sorry, go on.
I'm familiar with it. I've been using it. I've watched it evolve to an expensive, difficult thing to use. So watching things evolve in our hobby, such as Facebook, and I've been on Facebook since 2007. And now it's a completely different Facebook than I've ever seen. Now there's rooms everywhere, and these rooms are different sports card rooms, and there's different just about anything in there. And it's remarkable what's happened. And as Shawn mentioned earlier, March has been a crazy month, and it's been crazy as far as card value. It's been crazy as far as the amount of time that people have on their hands, the amount of money that they're sitting on. Just as an aside, the sports card gambling market, which is $105 billion a year, is at zero right now. So where's that money going? Yeah. So stuff's shifting around in the last 2 months that's never happened. And we're seeing things pop up as far as avenues to do business. And Facebook has these groups that now I'm looking at it going, wow, I can auction cards in Facebook. I can buy cards. I can do Razes. I didn't even know what a Raz was a year ago. You can get into group breaks. You can meet all sorts of people, and it's great. But you're looking at going, I don't actually know these people. Like, who am I doing business with? And Instagram's another one. I just joined Instagram 3 weeks ago, and I've already done a transaction on there, a significant transaction. And again, who am I dealing with? So we're getting into a known element for me, which was eBay, where you've got a lot of systems in place to protect the buyer and the seller. And there's a very regulated process on how you do business, how an auction is done. You know what you're doing when you get in there, to an unregulated area, which is now Facebook. And there's different formats, and you're now dealing still globally. There's people all over the world in these little groups that you're in. So there's less protection and more buyer awareness and knowledge that has to be in place. And in Instagram, I'm still trying to figure out on how business evolves in there. I hear a lot of people doing a lot of business in Instagram, and I'm thinking, well, that's separate in itself. Like, how do you figure out how to protect yourself in an environment like that? So those are how the evolution of this hobby is happening, and I'm seeing these things on a rapid pace. And COVID's driven this for our hobby, and what's going to happen next, I'm not sure, but it's meteoric and how quick this is happening.
Yeah. You know, when we were chatting earlier about this topic, you made the comment that, you know, you really don't have any protection on a Facebook or an Instagram. And I agreed with that. You really don't. However, the only protection that we do have, and it comes back to self-regulating and building trust in a group, is the vouching system, where, you know, if you're going to be admitted to a group, oftentimes you need to be vouched. If someone is, you see vouch posts all the time. Someone will post in a Facebook group and say, looking for vouches for Tim Heacock about to do a big transaction. Or they'll say, looking for vouches on myself and Tim Heacock, so that both parties to the transaction can gain some comfort that they're dealing with somebody who has a strong reputation and is known for never having ripped anybody off. Also on Facebook, there is a group, I believe, called like sports card scammers or something like that, where you can go in this group and see everybody who's ever been caught scamming. They have this master list, and it's like probably thousands of names long by now. So you can search alphabetically and look for a name that you may know. So it's really important that when you are considering, especially a significant purchase, and I mean, and again, that's relative to your position, but if you're making any significant purchase, you need to get comfortable and don't just trust the person at the other end. Ask for vouchers. Now let's talk about vouchers though. What I forget if it was you, Tim, or you, Shawn. One of you made the mention earlier to me that vouching comes along with its own issues. Put up your hand, whoever. Yeah, Tim, speak to the issues around vouching, because anybody out there watching right now who has ever done a deal and relied on vouchers, you need to hear this.
So technically, with vouching, there is a liability concern. So when you put your name out, it's almost like co-signing on a loan, but in a very informal way. Where if I say, Jeremy, I'm vouching for Jeremy, he's a good guy, and he enters into a transaction that someone's relying on, and then Jeremy reneges on the deal, that seller can theoretically come back at you and say, wait a second, you vouched for him. I'm holding you liable for what happened here because I relied on your comment. And now, can this go as far as a lawsuit? Not likely. But what it can do is it can tarnish someone's name within a social media platform. If that original person says, well, you know what? Forget about Jeremy. Your vouch is worthless, and I'm never going to deal with anyone like you. I'm going to tell everybody not to trust you and your vouches. And really, you didn't have a big play in the transaction. You just went out and said, oh, I know Jeremy. I've done something before. And the reality is we don't know what happened to Jeremy. Like maybe there's a legitimate reason why the transaction didn't happen. Maybe it's something as simple as it's 4 weeks of mail. And this person just couldn't handle it anymore and went nuts and decided to blame everybody that the transaction didn't happen. And you're caught up in that whole thing. So you got to be careful when you're vouching. Do you really want to do it? And just to elaborate on what you're saying, as far as, you know, there is a little bit of comfort in these groups. There is some vetting as far as getting into a group in the first place. And I agree. One thing I do when I do a transaction with somebody or start thinking about it is I look at their friends list and I say, okay, is there any of my friends with this person? Like, forget about a vouch. If I recognize somebody on their list already, then that makes me feel better right off the bat. And the more people you meet in this hobby and you friend them and you can trust them, then you're going to see those names pop up more. And that just builds a little bit of more reliability in these transactions. So Instagram, I rely on that less because you don't really have a friends network anymore. You just follow people. But on Facebook itself, it's a bit more intimate when you can actually follow somebody else. And there's kind of a sense of you actually know who that is. But the other aspect to this, which concerns me, is that with Facebook, it's almost assumed that you're going to pay by electronic money transfer or PayPal friends and family. And to the point where it's frowned upon that you're going to assume you're going to pay with goods and services. And I've noticed that no one even suggests goods and services anymore. And I think that's a bit of a leap for me. I'm quite happy to add 4% to what I'm going to pay if I don't know who you are. So I've got some recourse. If whatever happens to the transaction, I get my money back. But if if I were to scam somebody, I don't want that to happen because I'll lose the money. I want EMT and I want friends and family so I can leave if I want to.
Yeah.
So there are things you can do to protect yourself. There are some inherent things to watch for, but those are some elements that I'm just wary of right now.
Yeah. So one of the things that comes to mind is, myself, I get friend requests from people in the hobby who I don't know all the time. And the first thing I do is I go look and see who we have as friends in common. And then I decide whether or not I'm going to add them as a friend, because number one, they get to see my personal stuff on Facebook, and I don't know you. Do I want that? So I'll admit I've somewhat loosened up over the last few months, especially with the Sports Cards Live venture. I have many more people friending me on Facebook. But I think it's really important. And, Billy Cardboard Nostalgia, he makes a really smart comment here that everybody needs to be aware of. Because look at it, you can easily build up goodwill on Facebook in anticipation of a scam by doing a few small deals to cultivate vouchers. And same with Facebook in collecting, or sorry, I think you mean same with eBay in collecting cheap feedback, right? You can easily ring up 100 feedbacks on eBay by selling $100 cards or buying $100 cards, and then come in for the kill for a $5,000 or $10,000 deal. So I think it is important to do your due diligence on who you're doing business with, because again, from an investing, even estate planning themed show, we're dealing with real money here, and people will be devious out there. So again, it's that professional skepticism, or professional might not be the word, that hobby skepticism that we need to have to really make sure that we are transacting with people. So what I recommend is that you only transact with people that you know personally and you've met and you know their face, or that someone you trust knows personally, has met in person and knows their face and trusts, such that you can find them if you need to. You have some personal information, even a home address, something like that. I've actually gone as far as have someone send me a picture of them in front of their house, because I wanted to make sure that they knew that I knew that I could find them if it came down to them. I'm not some tough guys that's going hunting people, let me tell you, but I will turn that over to the police. So Shawn, if you can unmute yourself, I want to ask you something, because you do a lot of business on some of these larger consignment services. You mentioned sport lots earlier on in the show. I know you do a lot of activity on sport lots, something that I'm not even familiar with until you showed it to me yesterday. You also have a very large portfolio on ComC. Large, I mean tons of cards available for sale. You're very active on ComC. So, I bring this up because I believe in ComC, the issue of vouching and trust is completely eliminated. You don't need that. You don't need to trust, because ComC handles that. Sport lots, I don't know as much about. So thinking about those two services that you use and your other hobby activities, what do you do to protect yourself when you're dealing with people that you may not be dealing with face to face?
Yeah. So the harder half of it is when you're a seller. I think when you're a buyer, you have the potential for PayPal, and if you layer on MasterCard or Visa with your PayPal, you're very likely to, especially if you don't use friends and family, you've got a bunch of recourse available to you. Where there's more damage is when you're a seller. I have heard people talking about situations like Australia, where if you're sending from United States to Australia, from what I understand, if you're sending United States Postal Service, there is no way to track, because what the United States Postal Service will do is they will track it to the depot in Australia and then deem that delivered. How that actually gets to the final mile allows some fraudulent people to just say did not receive, and that really scares me. That keeps me up at night, because this hobby is built on fun, and if a seller's out there sending a card that meant a lot to them or was valuable, and they send it off to Australia, and someone just pulls a did not receive on them, it can be devastating to their happiness. And so that keeps me up at night, because then that guy isn't going to, you know, enthusiastically go to the card show and go and put $200 down on a Trey Young, thinking that it might happen to me again.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. One of the biggest risks in people getting ripped off is that they get disenchanted with our hobby to never return. And I mean, as a loyal, passionate hobbyist, you know, my whole life, I certainly don't want to see that ever happen. I want people to have good experiences in the hobby, and to do that, I think they need to be educated on how to look out for themselves and not get caught vulnerable by a scammer because they weren't familiar or ready to defend against said scam. Francisco makes, you know, he gives probably the best advice that we can give. Always pay goods, no matter if it's $5 or $5,000. Now, I'll throw a caveat onto there. You know, I do a lot of business with people that I'm friends with, people who I've been in their home, I've met their family, their kids, their parents, you know, all that kind of stuff. In those cases, I'm not saying you have to pay goods on PayPal. Although if you're not, I mean, let's be clear here, you're breaking PayPal policies if you're doing friends and family for anything other than what it's meant to be there for, which is, you know, sending money to family to help them live, I believe. But, you know, if you're paying someone to cut your grass by PayPal friends and family, you're paying someone for a sports card, you're probably breaking their policies, and you could get busted for that. But if you're somebody who is willing to take that risk, then, I mean, that's great for you, especially if you know the person very well, then you may have less risk there. But as Francisco says, you know, his rule of thumb is always pay goods, protect yourself, because it also protects the seller too, right? I mean, if something gets lost and you're going to make a claim, well, at least this way, I believe, I shouldn't say it protects the seller. I'm not sure about that. It might not. I should take that back. I have to retract that comment. But I think that, or maybe it does. I'm not sure. Someone can speak up. I'm not a PayPal guru. So I'm just going to stop that line of discussion right there, because I don't want to talk myself in circles anymore. Francisco goes on to say, registered mail is the way to go. It can be tracked and insured. Bigger transactions use FedEx. And, you know, when I've ordered in big cards from the States, like in the thousands of dollars of value, I do tell my seller, like, let's use FedEx or UPS. Let's use one of the big courier companies, because, you know, they're usually the most reliable, and you will have tracking, and you can watch that thing move through the world until it gets to your doorstep. So I think that's an important comment. Okay. Shall we move on to estate planning now, which, Tim, that's kind of your wheelhouse. So Shawn, pardon me while we kind of move on to Tim now for what might be a bit of an extended time, but I want you, Shawn, in the background to be paying attention, please. Anything you can add at the end will be very much appreciated and valued. So please save up some thoughts. Tim, estate planning. I'll kind of lead you into this. There are a few key issues that happen in estate planning. So let me steal a bit of your thunder and just mention what these things are that we're thinking about when we talk about estate planning. We're talking about the event of the collector's or the collector/investor's death. We're talking about a divorce that could happen if you are married, and a divorce is something that may happen. And we're also talking about incapacitation, the ability to make decisions for yourself. Tim, please, let's get some good free advice, everybody, from Tim. Thank you very much in advance on how to protect yourself from an estate standpoint as far as your sports collectibles and sports cards collections go.
That's quite a lead-in. Pretty exciting topic, I have to say. There's still viewers on this one, but so this is an expansive topic, and I spend a lot of time on it with clients. I'm going to start off with the stats. So 50% of Canadians don't have a valid will right now, and that's for anything you own. And you think, okay, well, if I were to die, what happens to my stuff? Is it going to go where I want it to go, or is it going to be eaten by taxes or fees or costs as far as administering estate through the courts? Then you get in and say, okay, well, I've got a will, but does it do everything I want it to do? And when you get into estate planning, you really have to start with the end in mind, saying, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, what do I want to have happen to my stuff? And when I have this go through it, how do I want my family to come out of this? So estate planning is really about maintaining a family unit. It's about creating a legacy about being remembered for being a great person, a giving person, all the things you want to be remembered for. But what invariably happens with estates is that the opposite happens. You see fights, you see arguments, you see estates being contested, you're seeing assets not going where you want it to go, you see stuff being unequal. The worst thing I tend to see with estate planning is when kids fight. They were friendly before, but when they go through an estate, now they aren't friendly. And often it's because of trivial things. And believe it or not, some of the worst estate fights I've ever seen is I've seen a $15 million estate blow up because they couldn't decide who gets what cutlery and who gets what teacups. And it's emotional stuff. So when you tie in assets that are untraditional and you think, okay, well, how am I going to deal with an art collection, a coin collection, a stamp collection, or a hobby collection, sports cards, whatever it is, memorabilia, what do I want? You have to ask yourself, what do I want to have happen to this stuff when I'm gone? Am I going to divide it to my kids or to my wife? Like, do they want this stuff? So these are questions you need to ask yourself before you actually start the planning part of estate planning. And once you've come up with it, and I'll give an example for myself, I look at my collection and I think, okay, well, the first thing is it's fairly expansive. I got a lot of stuff. My kids have shown some interest, but I've got 3 kids. And I've got one kid who doesn't care about it. I've got one kid who really likes it and one kid who I don't know yet. So it's going to be difficult for me to pass stuff on to one of them without creating an issue for the other 2. So it's an all or nothing thing for me. So I can't really do anything in my estate. So while I'm alive, hopefully for a while, I may give some stuff to one kid and enjoy it that way. But as far as estate planning goes, I need my collection sold. So I can't own it after or it can't be owned after my estate's gone because the kids are going to fight over it. So I need to give instructions in my will on how to go about that so I maximize its value. My spouse or whoever my executor is doesn't get ripped off, because when you think about hobby knowledge, you and everybody watching this has been in this hobby for a while and you've built up, hey, if I were to sell something, I know how to do it. I'm going to go on eBay with my existing feedback of 2,000. I'm going to have good credentials. I'm going to put this kind of auction and with a buy it now on it. Well, great. You know how to sell a card, but does your wife know how to sell it? Do your kids know how to sell it? Does your executive know how to sell it? And here's another thing that becomes an issue. If they don't know how to sell it and they try and sell it and they screw it up, they're liable. So the moral of the story is you got to give explicit instructions to those people that matter on A, what you want to have happen to this collection, and make sure they agree, and B, how do you deal with it? So to the extent, and you want to be specific, is here's what I've got, here's who you're going to contact, who's going to sell it for you, because you don't want to do it yourself. And so you got to have someone you trust in play, and I can see businesses coming out of this who will say, look, we'll sell your sports cards, and maybe you see these already in ads, we'll sell your gold and silver, whatever it is. We'll take your estate and sell it for you. But you want someone reputable that you can trust, and they can move this quickly for you and get the cash back in. So you have to outline that to those people that you care about specifically ahead of time so they know this. Other estate planning issues, the biggest thing is passwords. So cyber assets. Can your wife or your kids get into your PayPal account? Can they get into your eBay account? Can they get into your ComC account? Can they get into PWCC if you've got $1 million of cards in there? Do they know who to call? Do they know what to do? If the answer is no or maybe, you got to find a central place to share these passwords and the instructions on how to get there and what you've got. So the other thing I see with estates is often people die and the surviving spouses don't know what they have. They find out years later you had another bank account somewhere. Well, hey, I didn't know you had a ComC account. I've never heard of ComC. And you've got how much there? So again, you got to make sure everybody knows what you have and where it is. So getting back to things like passwords, instructions on what you've got and where it is. Now we're dealing with another issue that's popped up. And it kind of popped to me when we were talking to Tim from ComC and his ability to have an inventory of cards. And Shawn, you've got this. And I'm thinking, that's a U.S. jurisdiction. The problem with the U.S. jurisdiction is they don't recognize Canadian powers of attorney or wills. So if you've appointed someone to look after these assets, you almost need to do a new will in that jurisdiction where you have an asset. A prime example of this is if you have a house in Florida. Florida doesn't recognize Canadian wills, and they also have different estate planning issues such as tax. So you have to have a Florida will to deal with your house down in Florida, or it's going to take forever in a state because they don't care about Canadian wills. Same thing with sports cards. If you've got stuff at ComC, We got stuff at PWCC, and now we've got things like Upper Deck and EPACs, where you can virtually open up cards. And again, I haven't done this, so I don't know what happens to these cards once you have an image of them, but I'm sure they're at Upper Deck for a little while. Well, that's, again, a U.S. asset, a U.S.-based asset. And there's a whole host of issues that come into estate planning. You can get into, if it gets really big, U.S. estate tax. And then how do you get that stuff back into Canada? And when does Canadian tax come into play? And it can be a disaster. So the way you mitigate this risk is to talk about it ahead of time and plan for it. And you think, okay, well, I've got this now. This is great. I'm in good health. I'm not worried about my accounts in the U.S. because I intend to be here for a while. But if something were to happen, and right now we're talking about death, you want to make sure that your spouse, wife, friend, someone on your behalf can go in and say, look, I forget about your estate. I'm going to get these cards domiciled back in Canada right now. So I'm going to hit that ship button on ComC, get that inventory here, and then we'll deal with it. So you don't have to actually send a will or anything to ComC and get them to deal with an estate. The biggest concern I see right now is actually not in estate planning. It's in capacity planning. So you are far more likely to lose your capacity before you die than actually just dying. And it's interesting with COVID, there is a side thing that's happening is that there is a massive upswing in how many people are doing their wills. People are afraid right now that they're going to kick the bucket because of COVID. And I'll admit, so am I. I'm thinking about it. It's stuff I haven't thought of before. It's stressful. But what's more stressful to me is that what if I get this and I'm on a ventilator for a month? Like, who's going to look after my stuff? And powers of attorney are designed for that purpose. They come into play when you can't make decisions for yourself. And you have a power of attorney for health, which is fairly straightforward. You have a family member make health decisions on your behalf when you can't. A power of attorney for finance deals with your money, your assets, everything you have that's tangible. And it's your bank accounts, your investment accounts, anything that you want to name in there. But if you've got a hobby collection that's out there, and whether it's stored in some other place or you've got active eBay auctions or whatever it can be, you got to make sure that your power of attorney, the person acting on your behalf, knows what to do and knows where to step in and what to step in for. So again, this is the way you mitigate this is the same thing. It's communication with the person you're appointing. And maybe you even think about, I might have more than one power of attorney. I got one for my regular stuff and one for my hobby stuff. And you have a separate person do those two things. So you think, if I've got a big hobby issue that I need someone to look after, I can actually find a buddy of mine who's also in the hobby, who knows how to deal with this, and have them be that power of attorney.
Somebody and it's got to be somebody that you, obviously, I think this goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, somebody that you really trust, right? Your power, because we use the term power of attorney, but that refers to an individual who you are empowering to act as your attorney and make decisions for you for your estate and your finance and your finances, your health. Just to really clarify it. Yeah. Yeah.
They are you. They're acting on your behalf. Any transaction they do is actually for you and about you. So that's the estate planning and power of attorney issues that have really come to mind with our hobby. Again, it's easy for us to say, that'll never happen. I'm young, or hey, I'll deal with it some other point. But it's starting to pop up. And I'd love to ask Tim over at ComC if he's ever received a power of attorney in, or if he's ever received a probated will to say, look, someone passed away and they've got a pile of stuff there. You got to give us that stuff. And then what does he do with it? Like, what's his process when that happens? Because it happens. Like, we hate to say it, it comes up. So it's a bigger risk than people realize. And there's bigger ramifications that can happen. I think people understand. But it's stuff that you can mitigate ahead of time. Yeah.
If I was Tim, I would be, all right, send it to legal. You have a legal department that they take care of, right? That's what I would do. And I'm sure they have had that happen. I mean, they've been around long enough now that their clients have died. It's just a matter of it's just a matter of time, I say, but it's just a matter of time for all of us. And I think the one of the key messages here to everybody watching is that, we are all going to die, and we don't necessarily know when that's going to happen. And, it's like, you might think you're invincible, but you're not. And if something tragic happens, what are your plans for your collection? Who's going to take it? Who's going to dispose of it for you? Who's being left with it? Do you have your documents? And I'm going to show you guys something, because when Tim said to me earlier that, only 50% of Canadians have their wills, where I went, and I pulled this out and I showed him, well, look at this. So these are my personal documents. I'm going to show you the envelope, and I'm going to show you what's written on the envelope. And only my executor really has access to this, other than myself. And so here's what it is. That's my wife's name, Stacy, and there's number 1 in here is our wills. We have our power of attorneys. We have our personal directives, and look at number 4, instructions to dispose of sports card collection. I didn't just do this today. This has been my official documents really since my second child was born. And I would recommend that, you spend $1,000 or whatever it is, and you get yourselves these papers and get yourself set up. So trust me, you will sleep better at night knowing that if you don't wake up, your stuff will be taken care of. Your kids will be looked after in terms of your sports cards, especially if they are a very significant part of your overall wealth, let's say. Andy says, this is a wild word. He says, can't take it with you, Tim. No, you can't. So, you got to plan for this stuff. You really need to plan for it. Andy also says that he needs a vouch. He spelt it wrong. He needs a vouch for myself. Well, Andy, you know me pretty well, my man. Talk to Rod, talk to Vic, talk to anybody. They'll vouch for me. Okay, back down to here. So hat tricks and home runs. The COMC Canada location is located in BC. So as long as you have it on Canadian soil, that is covered. Sure, if that's where your cards are. Now, Shawn, you are a COMC super user, I would call you. What do you know about this? You're in Canada. You've got significant amount of cards there. Where are your cards located? And have you thought about this issue for yourself?
Yeah, I have talked about it with COMC employees off the record, and I guess I have a few thoughts. Is that if I were to pass away right now, I think it's the complexity of who are my heirs that is really a big determinant. Because if I'm giving my estate to one person, that one person has the ability to take all of my assets and continue them. When like in past years, people used to get away without probating a will. But what happened was, I know some of the major banks ended up having to having liability issues where someone came with either a valid or what appeared to be a valid will, showed up at a bank branch and emptied an account, only to find that there was a subsequent will that superseded it. Mm-hmm. And then the bank was ending up having to pay its legal team to go chase this down in court and figure out who was who was correct.
Right.
In the case of COMC, I want to say a few important things that I think could really help. If you have 40,000 items at COMC and you spasmodically say, oh boy, well, I'm going to get in a fight over what I'm going to give to my heirs, folks, that's 25 cents times 40,000. And so if depending on how much COMC cash is in your account, those heirs might end up having to pay thousands of dollars to ship them back. And then when they ship them back, you're going to be asked to declare a value. If you declare a value on your own items, you could end up being charged HST.
Right. But let me ask you this one. Sorry, Shawn, where are your cards? Do you know physically where your COMC cards are? Are they in BC or are they in or are they Washington State or Oregon? I forget.
Okay, so technically, here's the answer: is that if you're shipping to Burnaby, BC, they are held in Burnaby for approximately 1 month, and then after on a rotating basis, I believe they drive a van 2 ways to Redmond, Washington, and back. So and you'll see that on Canadian sellers, where you'll see on COMC item held
At a remote location.
at a remote location, which, by the way, does harm their. I believe it harms their eBay sales a little bit, but it doesn't last long.
Okay.
And then it's going to be in Redmond, Washington. However, legally, COMC does have a presence in British Columbia, and they can rely on that to kind of be pseudo-Canadian at times.
Which would help the Canadian consignor to repatriate those cards back to Canada if they have to. Tim, what do you have to say?
So wills are provincially regulated. So an Ontario will doesn't necessarily create validity in BC. Again, if you do a will in BC, it would have different clauses, have different protocols, and for that province. So yes, it's much better. There is a good chance that Ontario will can be interpreted in BC and be valid there. But again, you want a will in the jurisdiction where the asset is, whether it's and I see this most often with property, with houses, with vacation properties, that when you're out of province, anywhere out of Ontario, your will's not necessarily valid. So again, I don't know about BC. I know that the rules for wills in Ontario are specific for this province. So you got to be careful. You have to think, okay, what's my risk? Is it something I want to mitigate, or am I okay with carrying it? And that's with anything. Right. And if you've got COMC cards, you think, it's not a lot. I'm just going to give instructions to my friend, my spouse, whatever, get them back. End of story. And I'm going to mention it in my will. Great. That's at least you've addressed it. And that's really the goal of the whole thing, is that be aware that there is a potential issue, figure out your best way to deal with it ahead of time, and you're good to go.
Yeah, I think, and really what you want to do is discuss all these issues with your legal representative, with the lawyer that you are going to hire and pay to do your will, and all the other documents that I just showed you listed on my personal documents folder. Talk to them about it. When I went to see my lawyer about our wills, I told them all these things, and I said, hey, help me out. I want to make sure. And he told me what I needed to do to ensure that my sports card collection would be properly handled upon my demise. Whether that happens sooner or later, we don't know when it's going to happen. So everybody, it's good advice to really start thinking about this. And as Tim mentioned, there's been a rush on will services lately with COVID because people are scared. And the fact of the matter is, you just never know what's coming. I mean, there's accidents all the time. So it's best to, especially if you do have family, if you do have kids, make sure you're protected. If you don't, I would say it's less important. But if you have parents that you want to leave it to, name them in your will as the beneficiaries, and get yourself handled, get yourself covered off from a legal perspective, especially if your cardboard is valuable to you, financially speaking. Billy has a question. I don't know that this is one that we're going to be able to answer unless either of you know the answer. So I'm just looking for a yes or no answer to this question, gentlemen. Are there tax implications when your loved ones receive a major sports card through probate? Would they be taxed on the transfer of ownership? Tim, please.
So tax for any asset is paid by the estate. So if that is deemed to be a taxable asset, and again, now it would be a capital gain that you're dealing with. So you need a cost base and you need the current value. And the date of death is a deemed disposition of that asset. So you take a snapshot of saying, okay, well, it's worth, let's say, a PSA 10 Jordan. I'm going to guess, what is that, 500 grand?
Well, right now, call it $70,000 for discussion.
70 grand. And you paid 5 grand for it. You got a $65,000 capital gain on an estate. Let's say you're in a 50% tax bracket, 50% of the gain is taxable. You owe about 15 or 20 grand in tax, but that's by the estate. Once that item once the tax is paid, the item goes to the beneficiary tax-free at the new cost base. So that's an $80,000 or $70,000 card that the beneficiary has now received. They can do whatever they want, but they don't have a tax liability.
Right, because they acquire it.
So this brings up an interesting point. So when you're trying to equalize the estate with your beneficiaries, you need to equalize it after tax, because you have some things that are taxable and some things that aren't. And I've seen this blow up as well, where you think, I'm going to give this item to one kid, let's say it's a house, and this item to another kid, let's say it's an RSP, and you think, they're equal value, the kids are going to be happy. Well, wait a second, the RSP is taxable and the house isn't. Net of tax, there's a massive difference, and you're going to create an issue with your kids. So same thing with sports cards. You have to think, okay, well, is tax going to be applicable to here? And I need to design my estate with an after-tax thought in mind. Like where is the tax going to be paid from? I think I have to sell the card or sell another asset to pay the tax on my PSA 10 Jordan. So with estate planning, you got to deal with this stuff. And Jeremy, you actually brought this up, and I don't know how this plays out because the tax issue with our hobby has kind of been fluttered around, and there's no definitive thing. Like, do we owe capital gains tax? When do we owe it? No one's ever come asking for it before, but what, is it ever going to come up? And I'm going to go on a quick tangent, then I'll stop. But this is a political thing. When you're seeing the federal government playing out billions and billions and billions of dollars to support our economy right now, and you're thinking, okay, this is great. They're actually giving us a bridge from where we were to where we're going to be. There's a problem that is being pushed down the road for Canada, and that is, how do we pay for this stuff? And there's only three ways we can pay for it. And one is taxes. The other one is social programs, reducing social programs. What would the third one be? Printing money. And the reality is it's going to be a combination of all of them. And in Canada, you think, okay, well, they're going to raise taxes. Taxes are so high in Canada compared to other countries, there isn't really any room to move. And they're already printing money like it's going out of style. So we may have an inflation issue down the road. And they can't cut social programs. So what's left? And the only thing that hasn't been taxed in Canada are estates. So I think there's a risk down the road that estates can get nailed with taxes. And because we got to come up with money to pay for the billions and billions of dollars we just spent. It's not going to magically appear, especially when our economy has just dropped and we're not going to have GDP anywhere where we were, or tax revenue anywhere where we were a year ago. So with that in mind, you think, okay, well, there are going to be bigger taxes on estates than they used to, or maybe the government's going to be more diligent on taxes. Are they going to come after our hobby? Are they going to come after estates where I'm trying to give stuff like a PSA 10 to my kid, and now there's a 50% tax on it? I got to come up with a different plan. So we got to keep this stuff in mind, that A, it's ever evolving, and B, there could be another issue here as far as taxes go with estates.
Yeah, I agree. And the way that an estate is taxed is that first it's taxed based on its value. So if the estate tax is 12% or 22% or 40%, that's what the estate is going to owe before upon transfer of ownership of those assets from the deceased to the beneficiaries. You're going to pay tax based on the value of that. And if you don't have the cash, you're going to have to sell assets just to pay for the ones that are left that got transferred to you as a beneficiary. I just funnily, as funny as it sounds, it's like when you when people win big prizes on a Wheel of Fortune or a Jeopardy, and they have to sell something just to pay the taxes on what they won, right? Like that's kind of what it comes down to. As for your comments, Tim, about taxation on the hobby, I mean, I can speak to a little bit, as I did practice tax for about 15 years. And I was just telling my father earlier today that, I'm no longer a tax expert because I've kind of moved on. But, there is a rule, and I can't speak to the US, but I'm sure there's a similar rule there. But in Canada, we have a class of assets called personal use property. And it's anything that is valued at under $1,000, where if you sell it for under $1,000, you really don't have to pay tax on it. But if you sell anything for over $1,000, it all of a sudden becomes taxable as a capital gain, which is a preferred tax rate. It's half of your normal tax rate, but it's still taxable. Now, for collectors, I think we kind of think to ourselves, well, boy, I don't never want to pay tax on a card. I buy a Michael Jordan for $5,000, I sell it for $70,000. Oh, that's $65,000 of free money. Well, it might be free money to you if you're not doing it on a regular basis and it's not a business. You didn't do it with the intention to make a profit. As soon as you engage in a business activity with the intention of generating a profit, you are all of a sudden, in the eyes of the Canada Revenue Agency and the Income Tax Act of Canada, you are all of a sudden running a business, and profits from business are taxable. So it's pretty important that people, especially if you're dealing in big money items, that you're at least somewhat aware of all this stuff. So really interesting stuff, really important stuff. Shawn, please jump in.
Okay, so one of the things that protects you is records of purchase. Because if a Michael Jordan card or a set, we've seen sets. There could be somebody out there who has Topps Chrome Refractors 96, 97. basketball. That set has blown up, 5-6 times in 1 year. If they have a record of purchase, that could be very helpful if that terrible situation comes that they're ever audited. Now, I want to tell people something. PayPal actually keeps fairly good records that are fairly lengthy. And they're very detailed about what corporation you paid when you made that transaction. Even if it was done on eBay, they will say what item on eBay you paid for. But your MasterCard does not keep long-term records, and you may end up having to pay, in some cases, $3 or more. Now, $3 is a lot if you're going to try and get 10 years worth of records. That's a lot of money. So trying your best to keep records of, especially of your MasterCard purchases, that would be helpful. A lot of us buy stuff at shows with cash, and we can't even remember what we've done it by the end of the show. It's hard. But just do your best.
Yeah.
So that if this happens.
That's really good advice, and I can just say, that's what I do at shows. I keep a note on my iPhone, and every penny in, every penny out, I mark it down so that I can do my accounting and make sure that I'm protecting myself in the long run. Another thing I do that I would recommend is, I use a special email account for all of my eBay transactions so that I can always go back and find out what I paid for something. I never delete those PayPal emails telling you that you made a payment. I never delete the invoices that I'm sent from eBay. I keep them all there. So I think that's important too, if you are ever going to be audited. Okay, let's just back up a little bit here, guys. Barry Grice says this is already about 20 minutes old, Tim, but great info, Tim. Really appreciate it. So I'm not sure what that was about, but you have now helped me make a finite decision to pass on a winter home in Manitoba. Very funny, Barry. You probably know that that's where I spent the first 30 years of my life, in Manitoba. And trust me, I never want to, and it's still home. I can bash it because I grew up there, but I never want to live there again. I do like—
They have summer homes there?
They do. There is cottage country in just north of Winnipeg, and I grew up going there too. It was a lot of fun. Paul makes a funny comment. I find it hard to believe that's the deal breaker. Okay, Paul, settle down, Paul. No, I'm just kidding. Richard says, could you buy cars at inflated prices, anticipate capital loss to reduce the taxable capital gains on your estate? That would be hilarious. Maybe all those Stefan Fissé rookie cards could come in handy for someone. I mean, that is common activity when it comes to other sort of equities and stocks and that, where people do their capital gains planning on December 31st. They lock in some losses to counter their gains. And then there is a rule where, if you buy those equities back within, I believe, 30 days, you will be deemed never to have disposed of them in the first place. So you need to make sure that you're going to wait the appropriate amount of time before you can replace. It's called they're the replacement property rules. You have to make sure that you are waiting the appropriate amount of time before you replace your property that you claimed the capital loss on. Billy says, how would a cost basis for collectible be established if, for example, you pulled that Jordan as a teenager and held it for 30 years? Hey man, you're the cost of the pack, 25 cents. I think you would just have to, and trust me, the tax authorities are going to be quite all right if your cost base is 25 cents, right? Because that means more taxes for them. Paul says, best comment of the night. Thank you on behalf of all three of us. I'm not sure which one it related to. And Austin Olson, welcome to the show. Love the show. Thank you very much, Austin. Happy to have you viewing with us tonight. Okay. The next item, and we are really coming up to the end of this, guys. So we said at the beginning that we may go an hour and a half. They sometimes go 2 hours. These shows seem to go 2 hours. So we were going to talk a bit about stocks versus cards and value drivers. So Shawn, I apologize. This was another topic that Tim had kind of discussed with me earlier. It's the last one on my list that we have yet to address. Tim, can you kind of speak to what we were talking about there? And then Shawn will have some closing remarks from you, and then we will start the process of ending the show, which always takes a few minutes for me.
Okay, so where this came from is that there's a lot of comparisons between the stock market, investing in the stock market, investing in sports cards. And I look at that and I think, well, they're actually completely opposite things. So when you invest in the stock market, what you're buying is not actually a stock, it's ownership in a business. And ownership in a business means you're investing in the future cash flows of that business, which you are entitled to. Sometimes they're paid out as dividends, sometimes it's just paid out as equity in the business. Stocks trade on a regulated exchange, at least the over-the-counter stocks do, and they're liquid for the most part. So you can buy a stock any day; it's the same stock. So if you want to buy a Royal Bank, my Royal Bank share looks exactly like everybody else's. So there's no uniqueness to it. So I'm not buying scarcity. I'm not buying any of the things that you may look at in the sports card industry. So a stock is really nothing more than ownership in a business. So I separate that completely and saying, okay, well, if I'm investing in the sports card industry, what exactly am I buying? Well, I'm not buying future cash flows. I'm not buying dividends. I'm buying a physical asset that doesn't trade on a regulated market, doesn't have a bid and an ask price per se. All I have to go on are past sales, if I look them up on eBay or other sources, to guide my price. And sometimes these things are a scarce item, a 1-on-1, 1 out of 2, 1 out of 3. So values are based on completely different things than when you buy a stock. So when you invest in the sports card market, it's really a completely different thought process as to, okay, what am I investing in? Why am I investing in it? Is it a short-term investment? Am I looking for hype? Am I trying to get a 1-on-1 that I'm going to flip in 1 month, 3 months, 6 months? Or is this a long-term purchase that I'm going to store in my shelf for the next 30 years? So I think the conversation just came with that there is a significant difference between the two. And I can't really find a basis to compare them because they're separate things other than, some days I find myself choosing, do I want to buy a stock? Well, stock is sitting over there in my RSP, or can I buy something I can look at and enjoy? Well, I'll more often buy the sports card.
And anticipate that mail day, which we all love.
Yeah, that's the best part.
Something that popped in my mind there was we in the sports card investing world, we draw a lot of our terminology from the investment world, and maybe a lot, maybe not a lot, but the word blue chip, it's used a lot in the hobby. Invest in blue chips, invest in Hall of Famers, invest in legends and icons, the Michael Jordans, the Mickey Mantles, the Wayne Gretzkys, right? Those are the guys, those are the blue chippers. So if you are looking to invest in sports cards, my recommendation, my general rule is you want to stick with the guys who are going to outlast their careers. And you want to stick with the guys who are likely going to maintain good reputations after their careers. Because if they don't, Pete Rose is an example, although that was partially in his career. The classic example nowadays would be the O.J. Simpson. It went from superstar to complete dog. And Michael Vick, speaking of dog, Michael Vick's another one. Like and you can't anticipate these guys doing stupid things, or committing murder, or being accused of committing murder at least. So, but I think my point is, I would always advise somebody in the sports card hobby, in the investing hobby within sports cards, to look at the blue chip players, just like when you're investing in your stock portfolio, your RRSPs, your I forget what it's called right now in the US. What's it called in the US? Not the RSP.
Roth IRA.
The Roth, and there's another word for it too. But
401k.
401k, right? The 401k, the Roth, whatever you said, I can't remember right now. But yeah, whenever you're investing in your retirement funds, you're often putting those funds into blue chip holdings that are going to over time go up in value, slowly but surely. And that I think will always happen with the great icons of the hobby. But they might even have the benefit of experiencing spikes along the way that spike up and then maybe settle down a bit, and spike up and settle down a bit, and so forth. So the problem is we can't hold these assets in Canada, at least, we can't hold them in our RRSP, nor can we hold them in our TFSA, the tax-free savings account. In the States, I'm not sure what the rules are, what you can put in your Roth or your IRA or your 401k. But I think, to wrap it up anyway, we do borrow a lot of concepts from investing in equities and stocks and all that. And it's interesting. It keeps it fun because we do have real money tied up in these things. All right. Couple final comments. Austin says, thoughts on buying boxes versus buying the desirable cards outright. I'll take this one, fellas. I mean, the price of boxes right now as an investment, I don't know. For me, I can tell you hands down, it's all about the cards. It's all about the cards themselves because I know what I'm getting. You don't know what you're getting with the unopened product, except that it's unopened product. And you have to hope and pray that the players within that are potentially in those boxes are going to maintain, shoot up in value, and become something down the road where that unopened product will be valuable. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. There is tons of unopened product that is worth a lot of money. 90s basketball, all the vintage unopened packs, very, very valuable. Especially if you're looking at a pack of Michael Jordan Fleer, 86 Fleer, 79 Peachy Hockey. These, even the 80-81 Topps basketball with the Larry Bird, Magic Johnson rookie card. I mean, and then go back further, early 70s, the values start to just escalate in price in a major way. And then if you're talking 50s and 60s packs, I mean, you could be talking $15,000 for an unopened pack of 1952 Topps single card baseball, the 1 cent pack. So really, for me, Austin, the cards. I buy the singles. Billy says, this is why I love this show. Thanks, Billy. I'm an accounting major and a collector. Bringing on 2 guys with actual investing experience is much more interesting than sneaker kids talking about gains on Twitter. Well, I'm glad we can provide you tonight with this alternative source of entertainment. Barry, Tim, and Shawn, you both have baseball jerseys on. What baseball stuff do you collect? Let's start with Shawn.
Recently, I've tried to focus a little more on the blue chip. Also, I myself am caught up in the '90s nostalgia hype. So I've been buying McGuire, Sosa, Bonds, Clemens, Bagwell, Chipper Jones singles from popular sets like Topps Chrome and early Topps Finest. And I'm seeing great gains doing that.
And you're following the basketball lead. So I think what you just did there, Shawn, swinging back to at the beginning of the show tonight, where we were talking about looking for opportunities and realizing that just because we just saw a big run up on cards across the board, it doesn't mean that there's no more opportunities left. You've managed to find one, graciously share it with our audience tonight and with myself and Tim. And so, awesome. Thank you for that. And interesting. But you also collected, as you mentioned to me earlier or yesterday, the Topps baseball sets going back to like 1954, right?
Right.
Speak to the sets you own to this day, and then we'll go to Tim.
Okay, well, to the sets that I own, actually, I'm not experiencing fantastic gains. In March.
Let's just get into what you actually have versus the values.
Okay,
Barry just wants to know what kind of collection you have.
Okay, so it's in the case of baseball, it's a run of top sets and near sets from 56 to current. Unfortunately for me, I somehow, for whatever reason, skipped the 2011 Topps update, which is going to be one of the, it's going to be a regret and causes FOMO for everyone.
Yeah.
That set is the 2011 Topps update set is worth more than a 1970 near mint set right now, and it will be probably forever.
What about hockey? I think you mentioned you have some hockey sets too.
Yeah. So again, 54 Topps going higher and up to current. And cool. There I am seeing some gains because that means I've got all the Ovechkin rookies and the Crosby rookies, and they've done well.
Yeah. How about you?
I do want to say that a few things haven't benefited from the run-up, and that's a lot of the 1960s commons in baseball. They're still sitting very cheap. A lot of 1970s stuff didn't move up, but we are seeing some life in the mid-80s and 90s, especially Ken Griffey's 89 Upper Deck.
Of course. And I think that's because the people who remember those players playing are now in a better position to spend money on them. Whereas the commons of the 50s and 60s and 70s, a lot of people now, unless you're chasing sets, are like, why would I bother? I know that's my position. I commons, it doesn't interest me unless I already have a buyer lined up, which I'm just not willing to put out the effort on that. I will spend my time elsewhere and on other cards. Tim, let's get a rundown. I mean, I think I certainly know what you collect. I even, and I'm gonna go out on a limb here with Tim. I'm gonna say that about probably close to 10 years ago now, I was set up at the expo and I had some of my personal collection on display, particularly the one-of-one emblems from In the Game's Ultimate Memorabilia. And Tim came by my booth, and I remember, Tim, you, and I didn't know you at the time, you stood there and you gazed into that one showcase of mine for like a good half hour, calling friends over, you got here walking away, coming back with a buddy and gazing back at it. Anyway, with that, why don't you tell us what you're collecting?
And I apologize for the drool that I left on your case top. You had to wipe off after, but that was impressive. So yeah, you hit it dead on. I collect patches in baseball and hockey. There's one now. Thanks for asking. That's Paul Molitor. So I collect Blue Jays, but vintage Blue Jays, not the current ones. I love cut autographs. There's Mel Ott from Leaf Pearl with Bill Terry.
Nice.
All the dead cuts like Richie collects. I got a slew of those. One of my favorite things I collect are Topps auto proofs. And what those are buyback vintage cards that Topps bought, repositioned them in 2001, 2002 Topps Archives and Topps Heritage. They're numbered to 100, but they only put in 2 to 3 of each player. And I've got about 120 of those, but they're beautiful cards. Like if I'm going to have a vintage card, I love having a certified autograph on it.
Very cool.
I've got some game used jerseys. I've got some game used Blue Jays jerseys, including a Jose Bautista, Jackie Robinson Day jersey. I've got some game used bats I keep in my office. What else? That's what's coming to mind. But again, it's the big patches. I just love the stuff you can look and feel and say, that was in a game. That guy wore that, so you could smell the sweat.
Yeah, and you've acquired some really nice pieces from Dr. Brian Price's President's Choice collection. I know you've got that Johnny or the Jerry Cheevers belt buckle piece, and Tim's had, and I really do recommend you all go check him out on Instagram. There it is on the ticker right now at Chili Cards. He's shown off some cards that were only available to the public for like half an hour before he scooped in and snagged them up for himself, making a lot of people quite envious.
I'll show you one that never made it to the public. So so Dr. Price's booth is the first one I go to at the expo. So I just bolt right over there and just see what he's in there. And 2 years ago, he had a
noted that it's not my booth. Noted.
Yeah. Well, it's your second, but a loving second. So you only get half the drool. I went over there 2 years ago and I'm looking through his cabinet and he's got brand new stuff in there. It's just beautiful patches. And I look at one card and I thought, I couldn't even figure out what it was. And then he said, oh, yeah, I just created this. It's the only one of a kind. And I'll show you what it is, and I'll tell you what it actually is. So this is a lumbergraph of Wayne Gretzky. But it's not just a lumbergraph. This is a stick from his very last game.
Oh.
So it's so he identified the stick right on the card. So it's a one-of-one Gretzky's last game stick, the autograph from the blade of the stick.
What?
And I thought, holy cow. And first of all, if you've seen Gretzky autographs, they've gotten, less fancy over the last 15 years. They're barely legible compared to 20 years ago. But he did the full Gretzky autograph on that.
Wow.
And I saw it and I thought, you know what, that's an iconic card.
Yes.
I don't collect Gretzky. Like I don't typically do. I think he's phenomenal. I love him, but I find that Gretzky cards for me are already fully valued. And when I usually buy cards, I like to think that there's some growth in there at some point. But that one, I just said, here's my wallet. Take out what you want, and just give whatever's left back to me on the card, and I'm happy.
Are you? I ask this sometimes, but no pressure. Are you willing to tell us what you paid for that card?
I will. He gave me a discount, so this was 800 Canadian.
Okay. I mean, hey, what I love about that card, number one, the price sounds very fair for what it is. It is the autographed stick blade from the last game Gretzky ever played. There's only one of those out there. There can never be another one. That stick is now in pieces, and you got the best part. congratulations. Beautiful card. Love it. Okay, back to comments. Richard, very good discussions tonight. Definitely topics you can't learn from a textbook. Awesome. Thanks all for sharing your insights. So thank you to both Shawn and Tim for your insights, all your comments tonight. Austin, what are your thoughts on hockey possibly starting up again in the summer? They're saying it's going to happen. They're saying it's going to happen, Austin. That's what I'm hearing on the radio here locally. Billy, that's a steal. If it were an Upper Deck product, it would be on eBay for $5,000. Buy it now, at least, right? I mean, it's like a property ofs are going from, they're asking more than $5,000 for property ofs, and they're not even from his last game, and they're not autographed. They're just the name off the stick. Awesome. Al, who's been here. Hey, Al, a very interesting and enjoyable show, gentlemen. Thanks for your input. Al is You Tread the Viking on Hobby Insider, if anyone's unaware. All right, guys. Listen, very interesting discussion. Yeah, I mean, we're at the 2 hour, 5 minute mark. Shawn, anything you want to add? Do you have a card or two? Tim squeezed in a few of his. Do you have anything handy you want to show prized from your collection? If not, we will just say our goodbyes and roll on to the next Wednesday show.
No, not today. So this has been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining, Tim. Awesome stuff. Thank you for joining. I'm going to give you guys a hand on behalf of the audience and myself. I do appreciate you both joining on very last minute notice. So before we just stop the show, I'll just remind everybody, don't forget Virtual Card Expo, June 19th and 20th, sportcardexpo.com. I'll put that at the bottom of the screen right now. That's it right there. Coming up this Wednesday on Sports Cards Live, it's either going to be Ken Reed, who is the co-anchor on Sportsnet up in Canada, National Sports Show, or it's going to be Steve Grad, who is the lead authenticator for Beckett Authentication Services and has been on well over 100 episodes of Pawn Stars by now. And then also, don't forget Center Ice Cardcast, the new hockey card-centric podcast on all platforms, including YouTube. Check those guys out. They did a great review on the virtual card show. I believe that episode just dropped like this morning. So check that out. And thanks everybody for watching. Thanks to the guests, everybody. Have a great rest of the weekend. Oh, and one last thing. I always do this. Follow Tim again on Instagram at Chili Cards, right there at Chili Cards. You can follow me at JLee_cards. And I do have a Twitter account now for the show, Sports Cards LIV1. Sports Cards Live was taken, so they just gave it to me with a 1 instead of the E on the back. And last trickling in comments, thank yous. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks, everybody. We will see you again next Wednesday. Good night.